Debatemos algumas questões sociais que se impõem nesta altura, numa era onde as apps e a internet das coisas domina o nosso dia-a-dia cotidiano. Debruçámos também sobre a arte como possível último reduto da condição humana. Espreitámos o que o futuro pode significar para as novas gerações e sobre isso há uma grande dúvida. Eu julgo que já fiz isso e eu vou invocar um dos meus pensadores favoritos, dos clássicos e já falecidos, infelizmente, que citei aqui na abertura, porque, de facto, cada vez que revisito a obra dele, encontro inúmeras referências e lições para quase tudo o resto na vida. Marshall McLuhan é uma pessoa que, do ponto de vista académico, foi muito controversa, mas que hoje em dia tem vindo a ser redescoberta e revista à luz da evolução tecnológica. Ele morreu nos anos 80, numa altura em que o computador pessoal era ainda uma promessa do futuro. E, portanto, tudo aquilo que ele escreveu foi de um ponto de vista conceptual, sobre as mudanças sociais que ele observava estarem a ocorrer já na sociedade, sem lhe introduzir a rapidez e todas as características de miniaturização, digitalização que a era do computador pessoal e depois da internet e depois da telefonia móvel vieram a introduzir na nossa vida. Ele dizia que nós temos tendência para olhar para o futuro de uma certa maneira. Eu peço-vos que me acompanhem neste pequeno exercício, eu vou tentar não cair. Mas só para facilitar aqui melhor a experiência. Eu vou-me colocar aqui no meio do palco e, portanto, se isto for a minha vida, se esta linha for a minha vida, o futuro está onde? Para aqui, à minha frente, não é? Portanto, nós criamos, inevitavelmente, a sensação e a convicção de que se fizermos isto, nós iremos encontrar o futuro algures. Ele está aqui, está deste lado, não é? Portanto, não há hipótese de eu me perder dele, porque ele vai estar ali à frente. O que o McLuhan sugeria que nós pensássemos era uma coisa um pouco diferente. Não é que o futuro não está lá atrás, naturalmente, não é? Não, ele está ali. Nós é que não caminhamos para ele assim, nós caminhamos para ele assim. E, portanto, nós não sabemos exatamente onde é que nos vamos cruzar com ele. E quando nos cruzamos com ele, ele já deixou de ser o que era, o futuro, para passar a ser, mais uma vez, o passado. E, portanto, todas as nossas cogitações, interrogações, dúvidas, angústias, expectativas serão seguramente subvertidas pela realidade no futuro, seja ele qual for. Falámos de tudo isto, falámos do impacto real da automação nas sociedades atuais, falámos sobre os problemas éticos do comportamento dos robôs, sobre o confronto entre as profissões atuais e a maneira como nós as desempenhamos e aquilo que imaginamos que elas possam vir a ser. O encontro que ocorreu ontem no Jardim Buda, naquelas 18 mesas com pessoas a rodar, foi de uma interação muito forte e muito grande. Eu penso que foi uma experiência e um exercício de debate muitíssimo bem conseguido. O tempo ajudou-nos imenso. Está uma esplêndida tarde de setembro em Lisboa. E vamos olhar para uma última reflexão sobre tudo isto. Vamos olhar, aliás, para O Mundo Até Ontem, que é exatamente o título do último livro, do último orador convidado, que vai encerrar este encontro, Jared Diamond. Ele escreveu O Terceiro Chimpanzé, Armas, Germes e Aço e o livro que referi, agora mesmo, O Mundo Até Ontem, em que, de diversas formas, ele propõe olhares, e mais do que isso, nos indica alguns caminhos, alguns exercícios de reflexão sobre como melhorar a sociedade contemporânea, percebendo o que aconteceu no passado. E eu diria que, tendo em conta o panorama económico, por um lado, e político, por outro, de vários países, em muitas latitudes, eu diria que muita gente tem razão em questionar-se porque é que os seres humanos têm tanta dificuldade em aprender com os erros dos seus antecessores. Peço, portanto, a vossa atenção para o nosso convidado que vai encerrar este encontro, Jared Diamond. Please welcome. It's my pleasure to welcome you here at the stage. Nice to meet you once again, so the stage is yours.
Let me first check whether you will be able to hear me okay. Can you hear? It's a great pleasure for me to be back in Portugal, and now for the last 20 minutes to have had the pleasure of listening to your wonderful language. I've heard fragments of Portuguese, but this is the longest continuous speech in Portuguese that I've heard. You have a remarkable language. Despite the importance of Portugal for world history, this is only my second visit to your country. My sole previous visit was in 1972, 46 years ago, when conditions were very different, when your government and your economy were very different. Since then, of course, Portugal has exceeded all other Western European countries in the great leap forward that you've made in your institutions and your economy. And your country now serves as an inspiration to the rest of the world, to so many other countries that are attempting to make a great leap forward. You succeeded recently. In the last 46 years, since my previous visit here, I spent lots of time living with traditional small tribal societies on the tropical island of New Guinea, where I do field work studying birds. I'll tell you today about some things that I've learned from those New Guinea tribes that I've found of great practical value for my daily life, and that you may also find of practical value for your own daily lives. All of us here in this amphitheater spend most of our time in what are called modern societies, like Portugal and the USA, whose features we take for granted as normal. But our modern societies are very different from traditional small tribal societies. We humans and our human ancestors have existed here on our planet Earth for most of the last 6 million years only in small traditional tribal societies. Modern societies didn't even start to come into existence anywhere on Earth until about 10,000 years ago. Since then, since the last 10,000 years, modern societies have been conquering, pushing away, absorbing, exterminating small tribal societies. Until today, the only small tribal societies remaining, largely unchanged, are on my beloved island of New Guinea and in remote parts of the Amazon basin of South America. How do our modern societies, the societies that we take as normal, how do they differ from all of the tribal societies of the past and from the tribal societies still lingering on in New Guinea? There are many things that all of you here take for granted as normal, but they're actually new, very abnormal by the standards of human history. For example, our communication today is mostly not direct, face-to-face. Most of our communication is indirect, by writing, but writing was invented only 5,400 years ago, or by telephones, by cell phones, text messages, radio, and TV. Indirect means of communication are normal for us. Our modern societies consist of thousands or millions of people. When I landed at your airport yesterday coming from New Guinea, I found myself in a city of millions, and here there are hundreds of you, maybe 1,000 of you, but New Guinea societies consisted at most of a few dozens or a few hundreds. A New Guinean would never in his entire life encounter as many people as there are in front of me now. We routinely encounter strangers. Every one of you here today is for me a stranger. I didn't know any of you yesterday. But New Guineans rarely encounter strangers, and when they do, it's frightening. We live under central governments, but governments didn't exist until the first government arose about 7,000 years ago. We are accustomed to rapid changes in technology. I think of the things that have developed in my lifetime and that have disappeared in my lifetime. My iPhone. About 2 years ago, my wife finally demanded that I get an iPhone. I can push a few buttons on it, but not much else. Email. About 2 years ago, I learned how to operate email, simple email. Fax. I know how to use a fax. Television. When my parents bought their first television set in my city of Boston in 1948, our television set had 2 buttons. There was an on-off switch, and there was a channel selector, because Boston in those days had 2 channels. It was easy for me to operate. Now, our television set at home in Los Angeles is controlled by a telecommander with 47 buttons that are hopelessly complicated. For my wife and me to turn on our television set, we have to telephone my 31-year-old sons to get them to explain to us each time how to do it. All of those things are new technologies that are unfamiliar to me and that I have difficulty mastering. Conversely, the technologies with which I grew up and that I was very good at have become useless. To do arithmetic, to multiply when I was a child, I had memorized the multiplication tables, and so I can still tell you 25 times 25 is 625, 26 times 26 is 676, 27 times 27 is 729, 28 times 28 is 784. Or for longer multiplications, I use something called a slide rule. Probably most of you here have never seen a slide rule. Or I use logarithmic tables. But my 31-year-old sons haven't memorized the multiplication tables, and they've never used a slide rule, and they don't know about logarithms, because young people today have a new technology. It's pocket calculators. That's just an example of the rapid change of technology that we take for granted in modern society, which makes new technologies difficult for me, and which makes the technologies that I mastered as a child now useless. Those are features that you all take for granted in our modern societies. But traditional, small, tribal societies were very different in these and other respects. Traditional societies constituted every human society on Earth until 10,000 years ago. Now they're mainly confined to New Guinea and the Amazon. But some traditional features of society persist even in our modern societies. They persist in some parts of Portugal and the United States in rural areas. What then are the features of traditional societies that used to be normal but that you are not used to? In traditional societies, all communication is direct face-to-face. New Guineans, to communicate with each other, it's always looking at each other in the face and not being distracted to look down in your map to tap a text message. You look at your partner directly in the eyes. There's no phone, no email, no television, no writing in traditional New Guinea. New Guinea societies consist of a few dozen to a few hundred people. A meeting here with so many people would be impossible in New Guinea. I mentioned that the typical New Guinean would not encounter as many people as are sitting in front of me now in his or her entire life. Rarely or never do traditional New Guineans meet strangers because they don't go away from home, they don't travel. Traveling would be dangerous. If you do meet a stranger, it's frightening or dangerous. So when I've met a few of you here, you may have noticed, you did not notice me making any attempt to kill any of the people that I just met, and I did not perceive any of you here making an attempt to kill me. But if this had been New Guinea, by now, I would have killed you, or you would have killed me, or one of us would have run away. In New Guinea, one is not used to strangers, but strangers are normal in our large societies. In traditional societies, there's no central government. Instead, one reaches decisions by discussions in small groups. And technological change in New Guinea is slow or non-existent. What you learned as a child will still be useful to you when you enter old age 70 or 80 years later. In all those respects, traditional societies, all traditional societies, are similar to each other, and they're different from our modern societies. But in other respects, traditional societies are very varied. On the island of New Guinea alone, there are 1,000 different tribes and 1,000 different languages. 1,000 tribes represent 1,000 different natural experiments in how to operate a human society. But all societies, whether in Portugal or the United States or New Guinea, all human societies have to deal with the same universal human problems, such as how to bring up children, how to grow old, how to deal with dangers, how to stay healthy. Maybe we can learn from small tribal societies about things that are important to you about these universal human problems. The example that most influenced me in New Guinea, the thing that I learned from New Guinea that has most affected my daily life, has to do with dealing with danger. So all of you encounter danger, and you have ways of dealing with danger, or more likely of ignoring danger. I learned a lesson in my 3rd year in New Guinea about danger. At that time, I was 28 years old. I was young, inexperienced, incautious, ignorant. I did not have experience about the specific dangers of New Guinea, and I lacked New Guineans' general attitude towards danger. I thought danger was something that older people like my parents worried about, but I, young, big, and tough, did not have to worry about danger. Well, the experience in New Guinea that taught me about danger came when I was studying birds on a New Guinea mountain with a group of New Guineans. First, we studied birds at the base of the mountain, and then we moved up the mountain to study birds at higher altitude. We moved up the mountain, and I wanted to pick out a campsite where we could pitch our tents and stay for a week or so. So I came to a place where the ridge was flat and broad, perfect place to walk around. The ridge dropped off steeply into a valley. I could stand at the edge of the ridge and watch parrots or pigeons fly by. A great place for studying birds for a week. And in the middle of the ridge was an enormous, magnificent tree with a straight trunk. I said to the New Guineans with me, that's where I want to pitch our tents. Let's make our tents under this tree. To my surprise, the New Guineans with me got really agitated. They did not want to pitch tents under the tree. They said, no, we'll make our tents 200 meters away. I said, what's the matter? What's wrong with this tree? A great, beautiful place to make a tent. And the New Guinean said, look, that tree is dead. Okay, I looked up. Yes, all right, the tree was dead, but it was gigantic. There was no way, that tree I thought, is going to be standing there for the next 50 years? What is the chance that that dead tree is going to fall over precisely tonight when I'm sleeping under it? The chances are maybe 1 in 1,000 that that tree will fall over on me. And I explained that to the New Guineans, but still they refused to sleep there. They slept 200 yards away. I slept under the dead tree, and it did not fall over on me because here I am now. I thought that their fears were exaggerated. They were verging on what a psychiatrist calls paranoia. Paranoia is a psychiatric term. If you have paranoia, you should consult a psychiatrist to get fixed. I thought that my New Guinea friends were paranoid. They had exaggerated fears. Well, gradually I got more experience in New Guinea. I slept out in campsites in the jungle in New Guinea day after day, and I realized every night that I'm sleeping in the jungle in New Guinea, I hear the crash of a dead tree falling down somewhere in the distance. Every night you hear 1 or 2 dead trees falling down. And eventually I did the calculation. Suppose the risk of a dead tree falling on you on the particular night that you have chosen to sleep under that dead tree, suppose the risk is just 1 in 1,000. But suppose that you sleep every night under a dead tree. Then in 3 years, or 365 days per year, after 1,065 nights, with a chance of the dead tree falling on you only 1 in 1,000 per night, you can expect to be dead within 3 years if you have the bad habit of sleeping under dead trees. And so what I thought was the paranoia of New Guineans, it made perfect sense to me. I think of it now not as paranoia, for which you should see a psychiatrist, but as constructive paranoia, a good trait which is essential for surviving in a traditional society like New Guinea, and which I have found essential for surviving in the United States, and which you will find essential for surviving in Portugal. Constructive paranoia is a good type of paranoia. That's the most important lesson that I've learned from New Guinea, the lesson about dealing with danger, specifically dealing with dangers that are going to recur again and again, dangers that you will encounter frequently, for example, driving cars. The lesson concerns the cumulative risk of repeatedly doing something that carries only a small risk to you each single time that you do it, such as driving in a car once. My cautious attitude that I've learned from New Guinea drives many of my American, European, and Asian friends crazy. My friends who do understand my cautious attitude are a few friends whose lifestyle, like mine, exposes them repeatedly to danger. And they, like I, learned to be cautious by witnessing the deaths of incautious friends. For example, a friend of mine who was an unarmed policeman on the streets of London. Another friend of mine who's a guide on rafts on whitewater rivers in Colorado. And still another friend of mine who pilots small airplanes. All 3 of these people, like I, have seen other people die as a result of being incautious. And so they, although not most Americans, have learned my lesson of constructive paranoia. Well, you might say, but. There are big differences, obvious big differences between dangers in New Guinea and other traditional societies compared to dangers in the United States and in Portugal. For example, obviously the types of dangers are different. In New Guinea and other traditional societies, the main dangers include accidents of the natural environment, such as falling trees and lions and dangerous insects and exposure to cold and rain. Those environmental hazards are much less important in the West, where we have tamed and modified the environment. Nevertheless, my wife and I were nearly killed by a falling tree on vacation in Montana the year before last. Other dangers of traditional life are violence, infectious diseases, and starvation. All of those are much less significant as threats in the West. We have tamed our environment. Instead, we in the West face a new set of dangers, the dangers of cars, ladders, heart attacks, cancers, and other non-communicable diseases. So you might say Partly. There are dangers here, there are dangers in New Guinea. We've just traded one set of traditional dangers for another set of new dangers. But it's not just that the types of dangers in the US and in Portugal differ from the types of dangers in New Guinea. The overall level of danger, the risk of death per year, is of course lower in the US and Portugal than it is in New Guinea, as measured by our average lifespans of over 80 years compared to lifespans of 50 or less in traditional societies. And a third difference between dangers in Portugal and in New Guinea are that the consequences of accidents can be repaired much more easily in the US or Portugal than in New Guinea. For example, the only time in my life that I broke a bone was when I slipped on the ice in my home city of Boston in the winter. I limped over to a telephone, called up my father, who was a doctor. My father came, picked me up, brought me to a surgeon, took me to the hospital, where my broken bone got fixed completely. Now I don't even remember which leg had the broken bone because the fixing was so complete. But if you break a leg bone in New Guinea, when you're out in the jungle 3 days walk from the nearest airstrip, probably you won't be able to get out of there at all. And in traditional societies, there are not surgeons to set a broken bone. So you're likely to end up crippled for the rest of your life. Hence, we in the West are not so concerned about dangers, because even if an accident happens, it's more likely to be fixable than if it happened in New Guinea. That lower level of danger in the modern world, combined with our expectation that damage caused by dangers can be fixed, has consequences, bad consequences, for our thinking about danger in the modern world. Your and my thinking about danger, the thinking of Portuguese, Europeans, and Americans about danger is usually muddled and confused. We obsess about the wrong risks. We worry too much about dangers that really are very unlikely to befall us and that kill vanishingly few Americans and Europeans. And conversely, we don't pay enough attention to the dangers that really are likely to materialize. We Americans, and I think you Europeans, we obsess about terrorists and plane crashes and genetically modified crops, while we brush off the dangers of falling while on a stepladder. Our confused thinking about dangers emerges when you compare our ratings of various hazards compared with the numbers of actual deaths or potential deaths that those hazards cause. So sociologists have done polls of Americans and Europeans to ask Americans, what are the dangers that you're most worried about? And you can guess yourselves. The dangers that we Americans most worry about are, of course, terrorists, plane crashes, nuclear accidents like 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl, DNA-based technologies, including genetically modified crops, and spray cans, although all of those things really kill very few people. Conversely, we Americans and you Europeans underestimate the hazards of alcohol, cars, smoking, slipping and falling, and home appliances like stoves and refrigerators, all of which do kill lots of Americans and Europeans, tens or hundreds of thousands of Americans and Europeans every year. How can one make sense? How can one understand why we overestimate some dangers and underestimate other dangers? What things are shared between hazards that we overestimate, and what things are shared between hazards that we underestimate? It turns out that we overestimate the danger of hazards that lie beyond our control. We overestimate hazards about which we have no choice, hazards that kill many people at a time, hazards that kill people in visible, spectacular ways that make newspaper headlines, and new unfamiliar risks such as DNA and genetically modified crops. That's why we overestimate the hazards of terrorists and nuclear accidents, plane crashes for passengers, DNA-based technologies. I don't personally know a single person who has been killed by a terrorist or by a nuclear accident. I know one person who was killed in a plane crash, and I don't know anybody who was killed by DNA-based technologies, although we Americans are obsessed about them. And my guess is that probably most of you don't know anyone who was killed by a terrorist or DNA-based technologies. These things that we obsess about, they happen to us. We can't control them, and so we get really upset about them. Conversely, we underestimate the hazards of events that are under our control, things that we choose or accept voluntarily, things that kill only one individual at a time in ways that don't make newspaper headlines, and familiar hazards. That's why we underestimate the danger of alcohol, automobiles, smoking, slipping and falling, and home appliances. We choose to use all those things. And so we think that because we choose to use them, we can limit the risks by being careful. We underestimate the hazards because the average person thinks. The average person says, I know that those things can kill other people, but I, average me, am careful. And their risk for me is lower than their risk for other average people. But obviously, that's nonsense, because by definition, the average person faces average risks. And yet average I and average you think that you are less at risk than the average person. We tend to think, I, big tough me, am careful and strong, so that all those things may kill other people, but they're unlikely to kill me because I'm really careful. That attitude is summarized by the quip or joke, we are reluctant to let others do to us the bad things that we happily do to ourselves. The really serious hazards of everyday life, about which you really should obsess much more than you obsess about terrorists and genetically modified crops, include the danger of slipping and falling. Did you notice how carefully I walked up onto this platform? The danger of slipping and falling in the shower, or of slipping and falling on a wet sidewalk, or on a ladder, or while going up or down stairs. All that you have to do is read the obituary column, the deaths column, the necrology column of any newspaper any day, just to see what it is that older people die of. And you remind yourself that for older people, falls are one of the commonest causes of crippling, loss of quality of life, and even of death. In my personal experience, among the people closest to me at or over age 70, my wife, my sister, my best friends, my university classmates, the dean who hired me at UCLA, most of them have had falls which either injured them seriously for half a year, or left them crippled, or killed them. That's just an example of how falling, which we think of much less than genetically modified crops, falling really is one of the big hazards of later life. Well, with that in mind, I reflect that today I've already done the most dangerous thing that I'm going to do all day today. What is that? Do you think that I met a terrorist this morning? No. Do you think that I ate a genetically modified crop for lunch? No. Instead, the really dangerous thing that I did today was I took a shower. Well, you may say, really? But your risk of falling in the shower was only 1 in 1,000. Jared, you really are paranoid. But you know what my answer is? My answer is, so my risk of falling in the shower was 1 in 1,000? That's not nearly good enough. As an American man, age 81, American men age 81 have a further life expectancy of, on the average, 15 years. In my remaining 15 years of life expectancy, it is my intent to take a shower every day. That means that 15 years, 365 days per year, I expect to take 5,475 showers. But if I am so incautious in the shower that every time I take a shower, my risk of falling and breaking a leg is 1 in 1,000, then by the time that I would have taken 5,475 showers, I would have killed myself 5.5 times without living out my life expectancy. That's why I've learned to pay attention to the risk of things that carry only a low risk each time that I do them, like taking a shower, but that I intend to do frequently for the rest of my life, such as taking showers and driving. Just like New Guineans who've learned to sleep only under live trees, not under dead trees. Some people, when I tell them that, they think Jared Diamond's attitude of caution that he learned from New Guineans must be paralyzing. He must spend all his life in bed or staying in his bedroom. No, that's not the case. I operate instead with constructive paranoia. I get out of bed, I go out of my house, I go to New Guinea. Despite the hazards of falling trees, New Guineans still do camp out in the forest. I still do camp out in the New Guinea forest, but they, and now I, are careful never to camp out under a dead tree. Similarly, I assure you, I do not avoid taking showers. I still do take my daily shower, and I recommend it to all of you, but I pay attention and I do it carefully. I'm concerned about showers and step ladders and cars. I don't worry about terrorists and nuclear accidents and forget about genetically modified crops. That then, the lesson of recognizing what are the real dangers in life, that's the most important single lesson that I've learned from my life in New Guinea. It's the thing that I'm thinking of constantly, such as when I walked onto this platform and when I will walk down from the platform. But there are other differences between small traditional societies without centralized government and our large modern societies that do have governments. Often we think of traditional societies, such as New Guineans, we think of traditional people out there as either primitive brutes, or else we idealize them as noble, tree-hugging, green environmentalists. But in fact, people in traditional societies, Amazonian Indians and New Guineans, they are people. They face universal human problems, just as do we. They tried lots of experiments for how to solve those problems. For some of the problems that you and I and they face, they may have thought of different solutions from which we can learn. And I was very interested in reading today the report of the Francisco Manuel dos Santos Foundation. The 5 examples that I'm now going to give you of things that can be learned from traditional societies, all 5 of them serve as focuses of your foundation's research and efforts. So one thing we can learn from traditional societies is how to bring up children. In the United States, parents are ultra careful about bringing up our children. We protect our children. We talk about helicopter parents. We hover over our children to make sure that nothing can go wrong with them and that nothing dangerous can happen to them from which they might learn. We don't let our children make their own choices. In New Guinea, it's different. New Guinea parents have the attitude, children, they're small people. They've got to learn about dangers. They've got to learn about dangers themselves and how to deal with dangers. They have to make their own choices. They develop their own social skills. And you never spank a child in New Guinea. The result is that New Guineans, by the time they're 5 years old, have developed such social skills that they can bargain with me, they can argue with me about a contract, about a work contract, by the time they're 5 years old. A New Guinean at 5 or 10 is more socially skilled than a European or American at age 25. And so when my wife and I had children, I hadn't thought much about having children until my wife and I decided to have children. I was 49 years old at the time. I hadn't paid attention to how people bring up children in the United States. So my model of bringing up children was New Guinea. I brought up my children like New Guineans. Namely, I let them make their choices. My wife and I did not let our children make choices that would kill them. But other than that, if a choice was not going to kill them, we let them make the choice. And so, for example, of my 2 sons, one, Max, my son Max, at age 3, saw his first snake, serpent, Neither my wife nor I is particularly interested in snakes. We had not taught Max to be interested in snakes, but Max saw a snake and it was love at first sight. He wanted a snake as a pet. Well, this is a child expressing his preferences. So we bought Max a snake. We did not buy him a poisonous snake. We bought him a non-poisonous snake. And once we had bought him one snake, he then wanted another snake and a frog and a lizard and a salamander and on until Max had in our house 147 pet snakes and frogs and lizards and salamanders. He was expressing his choice, developing his preferences. That paid off when Max graduated university. On graduating university, at first he did not know what he wanted to do for his career. But one day while my wife and I, in fact, were on a ship in Europe, Max called us up on the ship's telephone, which is very expensive, 20 euros per minute. And Max said, "Mommy and Daddy, I figured out what I want to do. I want to be a chef, a cook." And we said to him, "Max, that's very nice. We'll talk about it when we come back from our cruise." And Max said, "No, I want to decide now because registration is tomorrow and I have to pay tuition tomorrow. And will you pay tuition for my becoming a cook?" Well, we had brought up this child to make his own decisions. He made a decision, first of all, to collect snakes and then to be a chef. And Max is still a chef today. That's an example of our bringing up our children to make their own choices. I see that the foundation in its report is concerned about children. It's concerned about schools, children, and education. And that's appropriate because bringing up children is a big part of life from which we can learn from New Guineans. Another area of life from which we can learn from New Guineans is growing old. That is a subject that interests me now more than it did 50 years ago. In New Guinea, old people are of great value. Old people are because New Guinea societies traditionally did not have writing. Old people serve as the memories of society. Old people are, in New Guinea, just as in the United States, the people with the most experience. So old people are recognized as being valuable in New Guinea. The treatment of old people seems to me a disaster area of European society. In most respects, it seems to me that European society does things regarding people better than American society. But one area where I think European society does things worse is in your treatment of old people, because mandatory retirement is widespread in Europe. I asked my Portuguese host today, "Do you have mandatory retirement in Portugal?" I'm told, yes, you do, in the public sector. That means that in Portugal, just as in Germany, just as in France, just as in Finland, just as in the United Kingdom, when you reach some arbitrary age, 62 or 65 or 70, you have to retire. But a person 70 years old is at the peak of life with the greatest experience. And to be forced to retire, you Europeans are depriving yourselves of the most valuable people in society. In the United States, it is now illegal in public institutions and many private institutions to compel anybody to retire just because of age. Naturally, you can make use of old people, and you have to understand what older people are good for. You do not want to assign old people to carry bags of coal. Instead, you want to make use of old people for the things that they're good for. Things that involve experience, things that involve management, things that involve dealing with people without letting your ego and selfish desires get in the way, as happens often for young people. So older people are the people with the most experience. If I were the great leader Kim Il-jung of North Korea, and I wanted to ruin Europe, I would do to Europe what you are doing to yourselves. Namely, I would get you Europeans to throw away your old people. That's an area of a difference between New Guinea and Europe and the United States. New Guineans recognize the value of older people, whereas in Europe, that's still a disaster area. I would say the leading disaster area of European society. Another thing that's important in another area where we can learn from New Guineans is staying healthy. Now, you may say, what Jared Diamond said about danger, forget about it, but nevertheless, I want to stay healthy. I'm sure you all want to stay healthy. Well, what do most of you die of? Read the annual report of the Foundation. Turn to page 73. And on page 73, you will see the leading causes of death of elderly people in Portugal. Most of you here will die of what are called non-communicable diseases. Diseases that are not infectious, that cannot be passed from one person to another. They are diseases like heart disease and hypertension and cancer and stroke and diabetes. That's what will kill most of you here. But in New Guinea, nobody ever dies of hypertension. Nobody, until recently, change of diet. Traditionally in New Guinea, nobody died of a stroke. Nobody died of heart disease. Nobody died of diabetes because of the diet and lifestyle of New Guineans. The reason that most of you, and probably I, will die of a non-communicable disease is because of our lifestyles. Namely, we consume lots of salt, and we eat a lot, 3 times a day, and we consume lots of sugar, and we don't consume much fibrous food. For example, salt. The American Medical Association's rules for how much salt you should take in are, we are told to take in 3 grams of salt per day. But most Americans take in 10 grams of salt per day, and most Europeans take in between 5 and 15 grams of salt per day. In the highlands of New Guinea, the average salt intake is 50 milligrams, 1/20th of a gram of salt per day. A New Guinean, you, in one day, consume as much salt as a New Guinean does in 1 year. And that's the reason why New Guineans never get stroke or hypertension, while stroke and hypertension are among the leading causes of death in Portugal and Europe generally and the United States. That's also the reason why my wife and I do not have a salt shaker in our kitchen. There's enough salt that we get in our food, like it or not, from the salt that's added in the supermarket and from restaurants. So another lesson that you can learn from New Guinea is watch out for your diet. Cut out salt, cut out sugar, eat lots of fibrous food, and you too, like a New Guinean, can avoid diabetes and stroke and heart disease. And you can die of a car accident when you're 105 years old. The next last example that I wanted to mention involves settling disputes. The United States is what's called a litigious society. We sue each other a lot, we have arguments. But in Europe, the justice system in Europe also is a litigious system. And of course, the Foundation report here has things to say about your justice system. The justice system in Europe and the United States is concerned with right and wrong. It's not concerned with making people in a dispute feel good and reconcile with each other. Any of you who've been involved in a civil suit in Europe, any of you who have been divorced or have been involved in an inheritance dispute or have had a car accident, any of you who've been through a civil trial know that the last thing that the judges and your civil system are concerned with is restoring a good relationship between the divorcing couple or between the brother and sister having an inheritance dispute. Instead, the civil system is concerned with right and wrong, and never mind whether the people end up hating each other. Usually people who go through our civil courts do end up hating each other for the rest of their lives. That's not the case in New Guinea. New Guinea justice is not concerned with right or wrong. Okay, so that person stole my pig. Did he steal the pig? Maybe he stole the pig. How much is the pig worth? I don't care how much is the pig worth. What really counts is to repair my relationship with that person, so I'm not going to have someone in the next village who will hate me and want to kill me for the rest of my life. So New Guinea justice is concerned with repairing relationships. It's not concerned with right or wrong. That's an area where European societies and some American societies and Australia and New Zealand have learned from New Guinea society by incorporating in our justice system something called restorative justice. Restorative justice is a voluntary movement which is concerned with restoring the relationship between people who've been involved in a civil dispute so that they will not be burnt up by anger for the rest of their lives. Restorative justice means bringing together the parties in a dispute, if they're willing to do it, and getting them under controlled conditions to talk to each other without shouting, taking turns talking, so that each person can understand why the other person did what he or she did. It works, believe it or not, it works even in the case of murderers and the families of the murdered people. One of my school classmates, his sister was killed by robbers. That was 60 years ago, and my friend is still eaten up with anger at the death of his sister. But in restorative justice, if the people are willing, you bring together the opposite people. You bring together the murderer and the relatives of the victim, and they take turns talking so that the relatives of the victim can understand the murderer as a person and can understand how that person got to the point where he killed someone. But similarly, the murderer hears the families of the victim and realizes he didn't just kill some person. He killed a person who was a father or a mother or a child. And the murderer comes to understand what he did, but also the relatives of the victim come to understand why the murderer did it. That's restorative justice, and the purpose of it then is what's called emotional closure. The New Guinea justice system provides for emotional closure. The European and the American justice systems work against emotional closure. The last example that I wanted to mention involves speaking several languages, being bilingual or multilingual. In Portugal, you are much more routinely multilingual than are we in the United States. We Americans often think that bringing up children to be bilingual is bad. It confuses children. And routinely, even though I'm the child of immigrants and my wife is the child of immigrants, neither my wife's parents nor my parents taught me their own language because they thought that's bad. I should learn just English. Well, there's now, in the last 6 years, there have been a very interesting discovery about the value of being multilingual. You might wonder, what good does it do me to be multilingual? So I can hear a lecture in English or in Portuguese, big deal. All right. Here's something that I think will appeal to you about being multilingual. 6 years ago, there was a study by a psychologist in senior citizens' retirement homes in Toronto, Canada. All of you who are old enough or have old relatives, you know that one of the worst fears of old age is the disease called Alzheimer's disease, the dementias of old age, such as Alzheimer's and other dementias. There's nothing we can do at the moment to prevent Alzheimer's. People talk about what can be done to reduce the symptoms. People argue, can you reduce the symptoms by doing crossword puzzles or by playing Sudoku? But how many crossword puzzles can you do per day? There's no evidence that crossword puzzles or Sudoku prevent the symptoms of Alzheimer's. The only thing we know that helps prevent the symptoms of Alzheimer's came out of this Toronto study. In the Toronto study, senior citizens were interviewed and lots of things were written down about them. And eventually some of them died, some of them died of Alzheimer's. And an autopsy was performed on them to see how bad were the lesions in their brain from the Alzheimer's lesions. It turned out that the only thing that predicted how soon you would get the symptoms of Alzheimer's was whether you were multilingual. People who are monolingual, who speak just one language, on the average, if they get Alzheimer's at all, get the symptoms 5 years before someone who is bilingual or multilingual. What we don't know is whether bilingualism gives you all the protection or whether you get 5 years of protection for each language that you know. Seriously, if you get 5 years of protection for each language that you've learned, I'm in good shape because with 13 languages, I have 65 years of protection against Alzheimer's. But we don't know yet. What we do know is that being bilingual or multilingual is the only protection that we now know against the symptoms of Alzheimer's. And a test is that when in that old people's home, people died of Alzheimer's and their brains were autopsied, it turned out that for a given level of Alzheimer's symptoms, multilingual people had more brain damage from the Alzheimer's lesions. Why more damage? It's because it takes more damage in a multilingual person to produce the Alzheimer's symptoms than in a monolingual person. So that's a valuable lesson. I've told that to a number of friends of mine, and increasingly friends of mine who have newborn children tell me that if the mother and father speak different languages, my friends are now adamant that the mother will speak to the child, to the baby, in her language, and the father will speak to the baby in his language, and so the baby will learn to be bilingual and has 5 years of protection against Alzheimer's, quite apart from all the other benefits that multilingualism brings. And not surprisingly, your foundation has a project here on learning a second language. So all of these 5 extra examples of what we can learn from primitives, from traditional societies, all 5 of them are projects that appeal to your foundation. In summary then, I've now given you 6 examples of ways in which we can improve our own quality of life by selectively learning from the lifestyles of traditional peoples. My most recent book, The World Until Yesterday, which I was delighted to see 1 hour ago, is translated into Portuguese. My most recent book gives other examples of things that we can learn from traditional societies. Now, don't misinterpret me. I am not saying that you should adopt tribal lifestyles wholesale. I'm not recommending that you give up enjoying wine and cheese, that you stop going to concerts and the opera and the theater. I'm not saying stop seeing doctors and dentists. I'm not saying go back to starving occasionally and every now and then kill a person, because that's the traditional lifestyle. No, I'm not saying that. I am saying that there are many things that we can learn from traditional peoples. We have the option of getting the benefits of enjoying the good things of modern societies and also learning from the good things about traditional societies. And so I hope that you'll enjoy thinking about the things I've told you today, and maybe even you'll enjoy reading my book about New Guinea lifestyles while you sit there sipping your wine in the comfort of your own living room, having seen a doctor this morning, just as I've enjoyed learning about the New Guinea lifestyles while living with New Guineans in the jungle. I thank you very much once again for giving me this opportunity to visit your wonderful country. Thank you.